Welcome to They Are Waiting for Us from Forbes Books, the podcast that explores how education can transform lives and communities, featuring conversations with change agents who are making a difference in education, from parents and advocates to teachers and leaders. Here's Dr. Lisa Andrew.
My guest this week is Senator John Laird. Raised in Vallejo as the son of teachers, John is currently serving as senator representing California's 17th district. He has dedicated over 2 decades of public service to the people of California, including serving 3 terms in the state assembly, authoring 82 bills signed into law. Before that, Senator Laird served on the Santa Cruz City Council for 9 years, including 2 terms as mayor in the 1980s, when he was one of the first openly gay mayors in the U.S. Senator Laird, welcome to They Are Waiting for Us.
It's great to be here with you.
So we're going to start with a bit of information about your background. I think it is important that our listeners know who you are and why you are uniquely positioned to discuss education policy, okay?
Well, I am a product of public schools, the Vallejo Public Schools and the University of California, and even took 20 units of intensive Spanish at Cabrillo College, where I later served on the board. And my parents, as you mentioned in the introduction, were both educators. My father was a high school teacher and principal. My mother was a kindergarten and first grade teacher. And my grandmother was even one of the last teachers in California to teach without a college education. She'd gone to a normal school in South Dakota, and she was
normal school. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they called it.
I know.
As if all the other schools are abnormal.
Exactly.
But the thing is she had to take continuing higher education units all the time to maintain her credential. And then I was a community college trustee. I taught a class at the University of California at Santa Cruz. I was chair of the budget committee that dealt with education primarily in the assembly. I was a college trustee for 8 years at Cabrillo College, and I'm in my 4th year of chairing the Senate Education Budget Subcommittee. So I have had a long involvement with education from a number of different directions.
Yes, thank you for that. And this is why you're uniquely positioned and why I think it's important that folks know that. So how did your upbringing shape your views on the importance of education?
Well, it's interesting because, it was never questioned that I would go to college. And my father and mother were really the first people to go to college in their families. And it was considered a real privilege and a thing that needed to be done. And then, both my parents being involved in K through 12 education, it was just always of incredible value. And one of the most interesting things that has happened is that in Sacramento, I run into people that in particular my father taught or was involved in. And I had this experience a few years ago where I went to a rather significant high school reunion in Vallejo. And I wanted to do everything, so I was going to go help set up the room. And I showed up with everybody else 3 hours early, and they said, "Oh, there's another group in there. They haven't quite left." I said, "Who are they?" And they said, "Oh, it's the people that went to the high school in Crockett from 1950 to 1970. Well, those were the exact years my father was there. So I just barged in, and I became a celebrity. And people were saying things like, "Your father taught me to swim. I was failing an exam, and your dad took me out in the hallway and gave me this pep talk, and I wouldn't have made it without him." And there was he had a championship basketball team, and one of the guys, and they were guys, that was on the basketball team later became secretary of the Environmental Protection Agency. And when I first met him, when I was in the legislature, I met him in this incarnation, he said, "Oh, your father got me to Sacramento." And I said, "How is that possibly true?" And he says, "I came to Sac State on a basketball scholarship." And then I meet somebody that's in his class at this reunion, and I said, "Oh, you must have known Winston Hickox." And she said, "Oh, yes, he's a cabinet secretary. That's a big deal." And I didn't tell her that I was a cabinet secretary at the time. I was my dad's kid for the first time in 25 years. That importance to education and the fact that you could see what happens coming out the other end and what people do with it and how their lives was changed was always an important principle in my family.
Yeah, and he taught them much more than a subject, right? He taught them about being citizens, being people, perseverance, grit, all those things you need in your current role, I bet.
It's really true, and and it's interesting because if you look at my father, he was a community person. He was a coach. He was involved in all the school activities. He and his best friend organized the faculty follies as a fundraiser. They organized parades. My father could have been elected mayor of that little town if he wanted to, and yet it was all about community involvement and whether it was said explicitly or not, about lifting people up. And there's this one story that when I was a kid, it was a teacher's salary. I couldn't really afford to go to summer camp. And so my dad went to summer camp as the counselor so I could go. And he was generally out of control. So they gave him the microphone. And in the morning, he would announce to the whole camp that it was time to get up. And he would make puns and tell jokes. And I would pull my blanket over my head and say, I hope to God nobody realizes who his kid is. And then I was about 25 or 30 and I realized I was him. It wasn't a bad thing. You know,
I know.
that same
I know.
community spirit, value of education,
Right.
all those things are a very good thing.
Yes, yes. That's always a little eye-opening when you look in the mirror and go, oh, yeah, there's my mom. Yep, see her. So our mission at the Silicon Valley Education Foundation is focused on college and career advancement. You graduated with top honors from UC Santa Cruz. So how critical was your college education experience in setting you on a path to public service?
It was very important, and I was very lucky. I want to be clear. I got to go. I was in the fourth full 4-year class at UC Santa Cruz. It was new. It was exciting. There were no grades. It was pass no credit. There was small cluster colleges where we all lived together. We got to know our professors, and I got this major award from UC Santa Cruz a few years ago, and I told the story that when I wrote my first paper, the professor wrote back something to the effect was, if there's a point here, I missed it. And then I did an undergraduate thesis on the history of water development in California.
Oh, nice.
And I got honors on that thesis, honors from the college, honors from the board at graduation, and in between was this incredible undergraduate education. And it was important because it taught us how to analyze, how to approach problems. Writing was emphasized. I learned how to write very well, which has served me really well in every job I've had, whether it's writing grant applications, writing op-eds, writing support things for bills, whatever it is. That was an amazing skill. And I think it also taught curiosity. And I had it anyway, but every day in the legislature is like being on a field trip. You move from subject to subject and item to item. And like I'm working on dams, I'm working on education, housing. I worked to really advance the marine protected areas. I'm working on higher education, housing, and trying to make sure that that is developed. And you're just plunged into different issues, different venues all the time. And that sort of base of analysis, writing, speaking, and explaining yourself has just served me incredibly well.
Yeah, it's a great point. We just, here in Santa Clara County, had a forum on, is college necessary? And part at the center of that is it's so much more than just getting a degree in law. It's about the thinking and the analyzing and the synthesizing and like being a critical thinker, being a problem solver, and being, questioning. People give you a lot of pass and grace when you're in college if you're questioning and pushing, right? It's like that's the place where you're supposed to be doing that and feeling that out.
Well, there was I worked for a member of Congress my first 2 years out of college, and then I was interviewed in Santa Cruz to work for the county administrator. I ended up being hired and doing the health and social services budget, working with community nonprofits and other things. But when I was interviewed, somebody that I'm still friends with decades later said, the place you came alive in the interview is we asked you about your thesis. And you said, oh, this is how I analyzed it. It's like I wanted to look at the economic side of it. I wanted to look at the political side of it. I wanted to look at the environmental side of it. I wanted to look at the side of sort of justice in how it was distributed, and look at the political process. What was the overlay on all this happened? And she said, you came alive and you sent us a signal about how you might analyze something, and how you did it with that. And interestingly, I did not understand when I was choosing water and the history of water in California to write about, that I was making a career decision. So I ended up going to work for a member of Congress who represented the Delta right out of graduation, and water was a big issue. I ended up being on the city council, which was the water supplier, the city, for an area twice as large as the city, and I was the lead water person. I was on a local environmental water committee that worked on a whole host of issues. And then lo and behold, I get to the assembly and I become a point person on many different water issues. It's one of the reasons I get selected as Secretary for Natural Resources, which had water as a key responsibility, and then again in the Senate. And I just never understood I was making a career decision by what I decided to work on. And the other interesting thing is when I was graduating and I got honors because of the thesis, I thought, oh, I'm a bit of an environmentalist. I'm from the coast. California water policy is being driven by urban Southern California and agricultural Central Valley. I'll never have a chance to influence water policy. And then lo and behold, I become the point person on water at the state level for the governor. And I give commencement speeches and I will say, just be careful what you study. You might be in charge of it someday. So please remember, stay on it, do it. But I think that is sort of one of the ways that my education really transferred to my career and was really vital to it.
Yeah. I wonder what you're making me think of as you're talking about this is ChatGPT. So all of this researching and writing and synthesizing the writing and putting pieces together, that's kind of ChatGPT. Now you just put in a few little lines, bullets, and then it writes it for you. So I'm and this is something we're wrestling with. This is a great tool. This is great here, but what are we giving up by having the convenience of someone else bringing in all this research? Someone else bringing all these things. What are we giving up in our development in our brain? I don't know the answer to that.
Oh, but I have a little bit of insight to it, because one of the interesting things for the member of Congress I work for is he was a real mentor. And he would almost always give his public talks and speeches without any notes. And I was terrorized watching it at first, thinking, how does he do this? And if there was somebody who was supposed to introduce, or some number that mattered, or something that he just had to touch on, I'd give him a card and it might have 1, 2, or 3 things written on it. And that way we would try to incorporate it. And then I became that person. And I think the thing that we're missing is that you have to, in your own head, absorb, be able to explain and analyze, and it's missing if you go down that path. And I worked for Jerry Brown for 8 years, and one of my most favorite Jerry Brown stories is we were doing the declaration on a drought. It was really significant. We were in the 3rd or 4th year of a very severe drought, and he wants to go over all 33 paragraphs in the executive order, which was totally Jerry Brown. We spend hours doing it. And I say to him, well, the real issue here is we could get a little water by how we manage and do things, but this is the bully pulpit. This is you standing in front of the public in California and telling them that they have to conserve, that we can't do this without them, that is really the key to this. And at the whole meeting, he argues with me. He just argues with me. That's vague. Why would I do that? That's not quantifiable. And he would go through all this stuff. And I remember walking home that night thinking, I can't believe I lost that argument. What is the most logical thing to do? And then I'm standing up next to him, and this is covered nationally. We were on the lead stories. I hear it from people I went to college with on the East Coast, because I was the one person standing next to him. And he walks out and he says, "We're in the greatest water crisis of modern times, and we're not going to get through it unless you get involved, unless you conserve, unless you do this." And I am trying to look opaque because I am so totally surprised. It turns out I won that argument, but he was not going to give me the satisfaction of letting me know it. It speaks right to your question, because what he was really doing the whole time is he was poking at it. He was seeing if it was right. He had his own process of thinking and internalizing it. And so basically I must have successfully pushed back on all his concerns. And the next day he goes out and just does that. And that's what we're missing if we don't allow people to absorb and analyze and decide what's important and put it in their own words. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I think that's an important thing to help students navigate through the work world and their life world after education.
Yeah. Well, as a first grade, fourth grade, sixth grade, and adult teacher, I couldn't agree with you more. How you learn, how you internalize, how you apply. I couldn't agree more. So great education, great background. I'm just wondering, were there any gaps in your education that you needed to fill?
Always. Always, because I think when you go through life and I really had the best of the fundamentals, whether it was writing or thinking or math. It's very funny because I was really good at math, and I got a 99% plus on the college entrance tests in math, and yet I took one math course. But it turns out that what made me good at math was sort of the analysis and structure that transferred to other things. But when you say gaps, it wasn't so much in the education itself, but in certain subject matters. I mean, for example, it was about 25 years ago, I realized, geez, I just have not had much experience with agriculture. It is now a central part of my Senate district. I'm about to have the Salinas Valley. I've had southern Santa Clara County, where agriculture is hanging on by its nails, and the Pajaro Valley and other places. And so I took the ag leadership program of the local farm bureau, and it just helped me immensely. But you see, you asked about gaps. The interesting thing is if you're given the structure and the framework in your undergraduate education and your K through 12, then what might be gaps in your knowledge, you have a framework to take in the information, to analyze it, to put it into context. And so I had gaps in subject matters, but I think I was able to deal with them.
Yeah. So as Assembly member and now Senator, what encounters within California's education system have been most eye-opening or impactful during your time?
It's interesting because I think some of them is trying to understand the diversity of the students and how we're trying to do this education system where the people that come into it have such differing backgrounds. And for example, I represent Paso Robles, and they had a dual immersion school, and it was coming under attack, and the school board was debating whether or not to scale it back. And I thought, well, why am I here if I can't have fun? So I go lead a tour of the immersion school with some school board members and make sure the press is involved. And it led to sort of a focus, although I wasn't solely the result. The parents were doing a good job of making sure there was focus there. And then I was asked, there were two other dual immersion schools, like one in San Luis Obispo and another one in Baywood, Los Osos, over by Morro Bay. And I was asked to go to each one. And it was an incredible education. It was an education in seeing who was there. It was fascinating because in the Paso Robles one of the parents was the brother of a deputy secretary I had in natural resources. And, they were not disadvantaged. They were not Spanish as a first language. And yet they thought it was very important for their kids to grow up speaking Spanish as well as English and be with other kids that might be different from them. And it was really fascinating to see that process in that education system. I had a very funny, I speak Spanish, and so I walked into a class in the San Luis Obispo one, and they're doing fractions. And they're doing fractions in Spanish. And the next thing I know, the teacher says, "Oh, we have the senator here. He's going to talk to you and answer questions." And I thought, oh, really? I should have thought about the vocabulary of fractions before I was in this. And yet it was one of those things that I just took it as it came. And if they asked a question in Spanish, I answered in Spanish. They asked a question in English, I answered in English, and was able to. And then I had a very funny experience at the Bay with Los Osos one, where they had all the classes out on the playground, and I think the kindergartners or the first graders all had American flags. I said in Spanish something like, "It's great to see you. It's great to see your flags. Wave your flags." And I get no reaction. And I'm thinking, oh, what did I just do? And the principal walks over and said, "The first graders haven't had Spanish yet." Oh. So that's the thing. What you really want to do is go and see people. I mean, there's this very interesting district, the Pajaro district, which is in the Pajaro Valley, which is the city of Watsonville, Pajaro, Freedom, Corralitos. It even goes a little into Aptos. And it has this phenomenal number of English language learners and a phenomenal percentage of people with housing and food insecurity, and a high percentage of just free and reduced meal students. And yet they are coming alive. They always have fiscal challenges, but they have one of the biggest culinary programs. They have this amazing agriculture program. They have a wellness center. I went to see the after-school music programs, and there are all these kids. You're looking at third graders playing the cello, and in a way that they're clearly disadvantaged kids. I went to one where there was an adult there playing the violin next to this celloist, and I said to the teacher, "What's that?" It's his mother. She wanted to experience it with him, so she's playing the violin while he's learning the cello, and it's all in the after-school thing. And I feel like that school district, for all its challenges, and it has some particular budget challenges, is coming into its own. They are really addressing the needs of the kids there, and it motivates me to go back to Sacramento and make sure that they have the tools they need to continue to do that.
And I want to get into the subject of some of the pressing issues in the California education system, but we have to stop here. Coming up next time on They Are Waiting for Us, Senator John Laird and I will talk about access to technology in California.
At the state level, we have some global things. The global thing is we're going to have a tough time this year, but for the last 7 years, it's keep the revenue going up to school districts, let them try to figure it out. We can do the big assist with broadband in disadvantaged areas, and it's trying to do the mix of all those things that get you.
This has been They Are Waiting for Us. If you want to learn how to create economic opportunity through equal access to quality education and create an extraordinary learning environment focused on everyone realizing their full potential, go to drlisaandrew.com. They Are Waiting for Us is a production of Forbes Books.